test tubes that are used typically in every plant tissue culture, right? Most of the tissue culture techniques you will see are done carrying test tubes of glass, but now we have other systems which I will show you. Now, over the last few days you have been hearing about plant genetic resources management, and just I think the director would have given you an excellent overview of what are the activities in plant genetic resources management, right? So, right from exchange to exploration to collection to evaluation, database management, in situ conservation, a plethora of activities are going on simultaneously for genetic resource management. I am going to specifically just give you a brief overview of which areas of PGR management we are applying tissue culture techniques. Primarily we are applying it in the area of germplasm conservation, but we are also facilitating germplasm exchange, exploration and even utilization. Have you already had lectures on exploration and exchange? Yes. So you have a basic background. I'll just show you how we are using tissue culture techniques for that. So specifically when you talk of amongst the various areas I have just shown, these are the specific areas where routinely tissue culture is being applied in different laboratories, including here at NBPGR. In very special cases we use it for field collection also, collecting activity. Of course, tissue culture traditionally, you must be knowing, has been most popularly used for rapid multiplication of material, right? The whole micropropagation industry is based on this technique. A large number of tissue culture protocols are used for disease elimination or eradication, especially if you must have heard of meristem culture for virus removal. We are very routinely using tissue culture methods for exchange of material, both from abroad and within the country, movement within the country. And my lecture will mainly focus on germplasm conservation. The details I will show you. Of course, you are aware of the phenomena of soma clonal variation that is used for generating variations. So it enhances our genetic resource base. And last but not the least, tissue culture. In fact, there are three techniques which have turned the entire face of plant breeding and genetics and how we are doing modern breeding. One is plant tissue culture. Can you tell me the other two which has led to transgenics? Which has led to the application? Recombinant DNA technology and the crown gall, the agrobacterium. Yes. So, no, these three technologies were developed independently. In the last century, people put it together to come up with the technology of developing transgenics. So science can move in many different ways which people would not have envisaged. When the pioneers would have been working with tissue culture or the crown gall or the DNA, nobody would have thought these three fields will come together and give us such a potential technology. So what I want to emphasize is all modern day technologies have some bit of tissue culture involved in it. Now coming to the main area of my talk today, that is plant tissue culture in application for germplasm conservation, which is what we are doing here at NBPGR in the TCC Tissue Culture and Cryopreservation Unit. I think you must have already come to know how conservation can be done. We can do conservation of whole plants, of single plants, part of a plant, part of a shoot, leaf, what we call as explants, and even down to pollen as well as now DNA. So it can be conserved in a varied format, and the specific methods for conservation also must have been touched upon in earlier talks. You can have ex situ conservation or in situ, that means in nature or outside the nature. And most commonly throughout the globe, if you see, the most important method is the seed gene bank conservation. It is the easiest and has been applied globally. Then today I'll be focusing on in vitro gene bank. Yesterday you had a talk on how we do germplasm conservation using cryopreservation techniques in the cryobank, and also part of it must have been discussed about genomic resource conservation, which is also done in the at various temperatures including cryobank. The field gene bank, you can have different methods like the crop gene bank or the arboretums or the herbal gardens or the botanical gardens. These are all ex situ methods, and in situ of course you must be familiar: biosphere reserves, national parks, gene sanctuaries, etc., etc. So for different, what gets conserved how, where, will depend on the need, on the biology of the species, on the infrastructure available, and finally financial backup. Now coming specifically to in vitro gene banks, what is the category of crops that are coming into our in vitro gene bank? Primarily horticultural crops, those which are clonally propagated, including the root and tuber crops, right? And the more staple cereals and legumes and oilseeds will mostly go into the gene bank. There are exceptions in both the cases, okay? Now, typically a plant tissue culture cycle, protocol rather, is mostly cyclic. So you start from an explant, put it in an artificial medium, allow it to regenerate, regrow shoots, and then a whole plant is formed which can be taken out. So it's mostly a cyclic process, one-way cyclic process. However, when we are doing applying tissue culture for germplasm conservation, it is more of on a network mode, because we don't only need to introduce an explant from the field into the test tube. There are many other associated activities which are typical for any germplasm conservation program, whether it is seed or any other form. So right from import to sample acquisition to testing its health. You've had a lecture on quarantine? No. Yes or no? Okay. So anyway, so they will be detailing what is the reason why we need to do plant quarantine and seed health testing, because whatever material goes into the gene bank needs to be disease free. So there are a large number of activities associated for disease elimination, which you will come to know. But once we acquire disease free material, we start the tissue cultures and then we multiply it rapidly, and then we store it in what is known as the in vitro active gene bank and in vitro based gene bank. The in vitro active gene bank comprises methods for conservation of tissue cultures using slow growth techniques, and I will detail those. And the in vitro based gene bank involves use of explants from the tissue culture to transfer to cryopreservation. All these processes always also convert into hardening and field transfer, and later for distribution and utilization, and either through exchange or other means. Database management again is an integral part of this activity, as is the case with all other activities in PGR management. So this is just to give you an overview of what exactly an in vitro active gene bank looks like. This is how it looks like. I hope you will be visiting this in the afternoon. Yes. And Dr. Rekha has already shown you a form of cryo gene bank yesterday. So these are additional cryotanks we have for storing specifically tissues coming from the tissue culture explants. Now this slide particularly just gives an elaboration of what is the difference between an active gene bank and based gene bank, and as the name suggests, primarily it consists of, here we are talking of conserving tissue cultures in slow growth state, but nonetheless they need to be subcultured regularly, whereas here we have put them for long-term conservation in cryopreservation, and once we put it, there is no need for subculture. So this we call as short or medium term conservation, normally carried out at culture room temperature of 25 degrees Celsius, sometimes lower temperature of 4 to 15 degrees. Here mostly it is between minus 180 to minus 196 degrees Celsius that the germplasm is put under suspended animation. Now coming to the actual process of how we start cultures for in vitro gene bank management. So like I have shown earlier, the first step is acquiring the germplasm. So germplasm has to be acquired legally, it has to be acquired from a disease-free source, and of course with correct taxonomic identity as well as passport information. And this material can be acquired either as whole plants or a part of the plant, I mean a shoot, a root, a leaf, or the vegetative propagules, tubers, bulbs, etc. And it can be also in the form of fruits, seeds, and even floral buds, or even as cultures. So in any form, depending on the species, we can acquire the material and start processing for the in vitro gene bank. Quarantine regulations, especially for material coming from outside the country, requires phytosanitary certificate. You will get the details in the lecture on quarantine. And of course, it should be from a healthy mother plant. And initially, if we get live cuttings or plants, they need to be planted in screen house or what are known as post-entry quarantine growth chambers for initial establishment. And the disease status, especially endogenous bacteria and viruses, has to be thoroughly checked in the samples. For culture establishment, typically we use the protocols used for in vitro establishment. You get the explant, you sterilize it in the laminar air flow, check for any endophytic contamination, and here we have the additional step of requiring the checking for virus indexing, which normally may or may not be done in typical tissue culture protocol. So just to illustrate, I have taken the example of banana. We can start with any of the 3 explants. These are the suckers that a banana plant has. We can even start with floral meristems, you know, the flower buds, especially the male flower bud, or sometimes we get ready-made cultures, which is the easiest to start with. But if we are starting with field material, there are international guidelines how to start a tissue culture for in vitro gene banks. So these are the typical guidelines from that. We need a disease-free mother plant, take out a healthy sucker, remove it to a particular size, trim it and send it to the lab, followed by sterilization, typical sterilization of tissue culture using sodium hypochlorite or alcohol or whatever, followed by culturing on a standardized media. Most of the crops that we are dealing with, by now we have standardized in vitro multiplication media. So we can use that, or a new one can be devised for a specific requirement, or if it is not available in literature. So initial explant is allowed to multiply. In tissue culture, the best part in tissue culture is by manipulating the growth media, especially in terms of hormones, plant growth regulators, one can design which way the plant will grow. So normally we design it in such a way that we get good shoots, and not only single shoots, multiple shoots. So once we get this explant, initially we test for endogenous bacteria. So by using typical bacterial streaking methods on a standard nutrient medium, these can be tested for presence or absence of endogenous bacteria. If endogenous bacteria is present, we normally discourage moving ahead. We do not multiply when there is a bacterial presence, even after the sterilization. So it's recommended we start from a fresh culture, or we give it another sterilization treatment. So once we have a bacteria-free culture, it is multiplied, and in such a way that 6 or 7 plants are made from one explant, and typically 2 explants will be given to a laboratory for virus indexing. It can be in the same institute like we have over here, or sometimes people send it to another institute. That depends on the situation. And the leaf samples taken from here are tested using normally 3 methods now, by serological methods using ELISA, by electron microscopy, by actual visualization, and also now PCR based diagnostics for particular viruses which are known in a crop. Once it is ensured that none of the economically important viruses are present in our explant, then these cultures are multiplied and they are put in conservation. So like I said, the germplasm, the tissue culture techniques for in vitro gene banks require special precautions and additional steps which may or may not be carried out, say, in a typical commercial micropropagation lab. Okay, in the typical commercial labs, they will only start with a known virus-free mother stock, and they will not carry out these protocols. Whereas for germplasm management, for each genotype, this is the internationally accepted norm that these activities will be carried out. Okay. Now coming to, so once we have established the cultures, the next step is to put it under slow conservation. What we can do is allow the cultures to grow, put adequate numbers, say 20 to 24 cultures per genotype, and let it allow it to grow, typically as is done in a tissue culture lab. So if anybody has handled tissue cultures, they will know normally any culture will go up easily up to 3 months without any problem. Okay. After that, the medium gets depleted and it needs to be subcultured. So in some species which are inherently slow growing, we can have this method that we simply grow it on a typical multiplication medium and subculture it every 6 months or 8 months, and that depends on the species. So these are some examples where normal medium has been sometimes used, especially in our laboratory, for for storage of cultures under in vitro gene bank. The advantage is it gives very little stress, it saves inputs like low temperature, and the material is always ready for multiplication if we have to share with the researchers. The only problem is it involves a lot of subculturing, which means labor, and that increases the cost, and also the risk of contamination and errors is always there when you are regularly subculturing. So therefore, again it is standardized that by changing the physical parameters or the chemical parameters in the medium, and induction of storage organs. These are the 3 broad categories of achieving in vitro slow growth. Okay. So just by reducing the temperature and which cultures are stored, the growth gets slowed. As is typically you must have seen, if you buy fresh fruits, keep it outside, it will be spoiled in 2 days. Keep it in the fridge, it will last for 7 days. So is the case with the cultures. You keep it at low temperature, they will tend to have a slower growth and last longer. So it works very well in temperate species, but the problem arises in tropical species which are more susceptible to low temperature. They have a high sensitivity and they do not survive low temperatures very well. So this method of lowering temperature works with typically temperate species. Some laboratories also report reduction of light. Again, light is a source of which aids to the growth of the plant. If we reduce the light or eliminate it completely, again it affects the growth and the duration of the cultures can be increased. There are other physical methods like change of culture vessel, change of the size and type of culture vessel, and even something like mineral oil overlay of the cultures. So that cuts off the oxygen in which the explants are growing. Again, it reduces the growth, and I will just show you the examples. So those were the physical means. Coming to the chemical means, decreasing the nutrient or sucrose concentration in the culture medium is one of the most typical methods of in vitro slow growth that are practiced in most laboratories. And one can work with osmotic regulators like mannitol or sorbitol. Some people have tested growth retardants like maleic hydrazide, abscisic acid, dimethyl succinic acid, etc. But we who have been practicing in vitro gene banking, we do not encourage this because it has the tendency to induce somaclonal variation because it's giving additional stress to the plants. So normally that is avoided. Osmotic regulators and minimal media is more common. And finally, there is the technique of induction of in vitro storage organs. Because we are working with vegetatively propagated crops, which in nature produce perinating organs, tubers, bulbs, rhizomes, the same can be induced in the tissue culture by manipulation of the medium, especially by increasing the sucrose concentration, and that is what is normally done for achieving in vitro storage for these group of plants, the garlic, ginger, turmeric, taro, etc. So just to illustrate the example, these are typical cultures of mentha kept at 4 degrees. In Campharia, we have tested the use of osmotica like mannitol. Here we have reduced the nutrient concentration, so we call it minimal growth media. And here in Bacopa we have used mineral oil overlay, and that can provide subculture duration even up to 3 years. Up to 3 years in the same test tube the plant will not die, and it will be recovered, taken out in the field in a viable condition.
What is mineral oil overlay?
Okay, so mineral oil overlay, mineral oil is a substance that is available. We add about 1 to 2 centimeter volume depending on the vessel. So when the explant is submerged, initially the explant is submerged in the mineral oil. So that cuts off the oxygen for the tissue. But it is not, it does not kill the tissue. That is the beauty of that. So it provides minimal amount of oxygen, and then the culture grows extremely slowly. So in fact, in this tube you can see the growth of 1 year after mineral oil overlay. The medium, the cultures without mineral oil are almost on the verge of dying, whereas here they are very healthy and they will continue to grow for another period of time. So it's basically cutting off the oxygen available to the explant. Another very easy method of increasing subculture period is by changing the type of vessel we are using for conservation. Typically we use glass test tubes, but if we shift to magenta bottles or boxes, these are gas permeable poly heat sealable bags. These are extremely good for long term storage. They allow exchange of gas, but they do not allow evaporation of the medium, so the cultures store for a longer period of time. And there are various other types of vessels in which directly affect the growth of the plant. A very simple technique that is practiced almost the world over now is typically, again, tissue culture. To begin with, we used to use cotton plugs. There the medium will not last beyond 3 to 4 months. It will evaporate and get depleted. Just by replacing them with polypropylene caps, it easily goes up to 1 year. So by just this simple difference, you can see the growth of the plant. This is in banana after 4 months. The plant is dead. Here the plant is very much alive. So these are very simple techniques, and what we do when we are practicing in vitro conservation is we combine 2 or 3 techniques. Okay. This is one of the best techniques we have for in vitro conservation wherever the species has a perinating organ. So like I have already given you the examples, ginger, you can see these rhizomes, these are all produced in the test tube just by increasing the sucrose. So normal sucrose we use in the medium is 3%. If we increase it to 10%, these structures are formed and these will stay in the tube alive for even up to 2 to 3 years. And the advantage with these is you can take them out and put it on a fresh medium, or you can take them out directly and put it in the field. So it can grow directly into the field. So it's also a means for hardening. So is the case we have achieved in taro, arabi, as well as in garlics. So once these organs are induced, they go up for a very long period of time. Again, subculturing is avoided. So based on all these factors, for each species we devise the most optimal strategy and apply it for conservation of a large array of genotypes for conservation, ensuring that there is no risk of genetic variation, because somaclonal variation is always a sword hanging over every tissue culture. So when we are doing germplasm conservation, we need to avoid somaclonal variation, and therefore our method of conservation is chosen carefully. It needs to be technically less demanding and also cost effective, and ease of operation in terms of infrastructure. While tissue culture has been applied to more than, I think, 300 plant species, crop species, there are certain limitations for its in vitro conservation. When the technique used is low temperature, in a country, in tropical regions, especially in a place like Delhi, it becomes a very expensive exercise, because maintaining a room at 25 degrees is easy, but it is very, very expensive and difficult to do it at 15 degrees or 4 degrees. So you would have seen the gene bank. Have you visited that? You have seen how elaborate it is to maintain the modules at -4 and -20. It's very expensive and very time consuming. I mean, demanding in terms of infrastructure. So for maintaining a tissue culture room at 15 is a difficult exercise. You will see today our tissue culture room where we are maintaining the temperature constantly at 25 degrees, plus or minus. Also, contamination is a big issue in tissue culture, and slow growth conditions can create stress. I have already talked about somaclonal variation, and this technique is only applicable for short to medium term, say 3 months to maximum 3 years. So to overcome that, we need to move to the cryopreservation technology, which I will just come. But all our protocols that we develop for in vitro conservation, we simultaneously test for their genetic stability using both morphological, I mean all the methods, morphological, biochemical, cytological and molecular methods, to ensure that no variation is coming in, because what we have conserved is what should come out later. So this is an activity routinely done with in vitro conservation. Cryopreservation, as already told to you yesterday, is the non-lethal storage of tissues at ultra low temperatures. So for in vitro gene bank, we use typically shoot tips, sometimes seeds, embryos, embryonic axis and cell lines for their cryopreservation. The technique is safe, cost effective, but it is highly skill driven, and typically you have been shown all the protocols yesterday, so I am not going to go into the details, but there are 2 broad categories of cryopreservation methods. One is the classical cryopreservation using freeze-induced dehydration, where there is pre-growth, cryoprotection, freezing, storage in liquid nitrogen, thawing and regrowth. So here we use the controlled freezer, whereas there are other vitrification-based techniques where we condition the plant to tolerate desiccation. Once the excess water has been removed, then we put it in liquid nitrogen, and then equal precaution is taken while we thaw the material. So today afternoon, I think you will be witnessing some of these protocols. For instance, droplet vitrification, encapsulation, dehydration. I don't know whether the V cryoplate, no. All the others. So in the afternoon, you will be seeing all these techniques. So I am not going to go into the details. So just to illustrate how we do cryopreservation in banana, these are the shoot cultures we begin with. We induce what are known as proliferating meristems. Alternatively, we can isolate meristems and use those. These are treated in high sucrose medium to remove the excess water. Then the proliferating tips are isolated and treated in a cryoprotectant, which will again desiccate the tissue further. After that, it is frozen in liquid nitrogen, transferred to cryovials, and from here they are under cryoprotectant, transferred to a droplet on an aluminium foil, transferred to cryovials, and then frozen in liquid nitrogen. And then they can be stored in the gene bank, cryogene bank, or they can be some subsample will be taken out to test for the regrowth. And this is how we do the cryobanking. I hope there will be a demo today. Okay, the thing with cryopreservation, especially when we are dealing with large number of genotypes, is while it will work on a few, it may not respond equally well on the others. So the protocol needs to be standardized for a few group of genotypes. It depends on the species. So for instance, in banana we find there are good storers and there are bad storers. So the protocol needs to be refined for them. And simultaneously we also take out the material, even in case of cryopreservation, to test for the genetic stability. This is an example of banana that we have done. The cryopreserved material has been transferred in the field and it has fruited very well, not only here in Delhi, we have also shared with our partners in Trichy, and they also reported the no effect of cryopreservation on the genetic stability of banana. These are some of the other crops where various explants have been used using various strategies, and these have been cryobanked here and in other laboratories. Now the large scale application of cryopreservation is being done routinely, not only at NBPGR, where right now we have put 150 accessions from 50 different vegetatively propagated crops, but also other laboratories as Fort Collins in USA, where they are doing apple, the National Institute of Agrobiological Research, where they are doing mulberry, and the World Collection of Banana at Leuven, and cassava at Seattle, Colombia. There are several other examples. These are just a few illustrative examples. Coming to the next area where plant tissue culture is being used for germplasm management, and that is in exchange and plant quarantine. Okay, what is the need of quarantine and what are the exchange protocols, I think are being covered in the other lecture. So I'll just focus on why tissue culture is being used for this particular activity. These are international guidelines for exchange of material. It is developed by FAO and IPGRI. IPGRI is now known as Biodiversity International. You might be knowing that. The germplasm needs to be from a pathogen-free source, preferably in the in vitro form, preferably indexed for viruses, and should be moved through regulated quarantine channels. So wherever exchange of vegetatively propagated crops or clonally propagated crops, I hope you know the difference between the two. Can anybody tell me? By raising their hands. When I say clonally propagated crops and vegetatively propagated crops, who can tell me the difference?
Vegetatively can from the only explant, and propagated plants can be on any multiple plants from the one.
No, I'm just asking a very botanical definition. What's the difference between clonally propagated crop plant? Okay, let's talk of crops. Clonally propagated crops and vegetatively propagated crops.
Clonally propagated plants, same genes, same genetic information.
Yes. And vegetatively?
Different genes.
Yes. It's very simple. It's built in. Vegetatively propagated crops are those which have a natural vegetative propagating organ. Typically, potato, ginger, turmeric. Okay, there is a natural perinating organ which is also used as the seed for propagating that material. Now what about clonally propagated plants? Any example somebody can tell me?
Tissue culture.
Sorry? Yeah, tissue culture is one. I mean, I'm talking in nature. How do you identify a clonally propagated crop? So typical example is, yes, rose members, all your apple, pear, etc., etc. They all produce viable seeds which can give rise to plants, but under cultivation they are always multiplied through vegetative means, typically by grafting or shoot layering, air layering, etc. So it's more of a agronomic thing, the clonal propagation. Tissue culture is one method of clonal propagation, but you can also do it in nature, ex situ. Okay. So I have been using these words synonymously. So, but for vegetatively propagated crops, this is a typical recommendation that we use tissue cultures for their transfer, because suppose we are to exchange things like tubers or even rhizomes or suckers, they all come with a lot of mud adhering to them, and they become source of contamination, and then quarantine becomes difficult. So therefore it is now a routine practice to exchange these materials in form of tissue culture. Okay. If they are exchanged in their vegetative form, then there are certain quarantine principles involved, which you will be told in the quarantine lecture. Okay, so what is the need? We are here dealing with those materials which have vegetative propagules, or they are highly perishable. Sometimes budwoods are exchanged which are perishable in nature, or even whole plants can be exchanged. Again, they tend to be perishable in nature, and they are bulky and difficult to handle, and the number of samples which you can exchange gets limited because of their size. For instance, coconut, if we are to exchange coconut whole nuts, very large volume, if we just take out the explant and put it in culture, the volume reduces significantly. Okay. Typically, the explants that are used for exchange are nodal cutting, shoot apices, zygotic or somatic embryos, and the perinating organs, which I have already discussed earlier. The advantages are many. When we are using tissue culture, we are not only reducing the bulk, we can use tissue culture techniques for eliminating the viruses. The perishable material, once it is put in tissue culture, it doesn't die. There is medium for it to grow. And it helps in shipping larger quantities. In a small pack, you can pack many accessions or many crops also. And in tissue culture, material is available throughout the year. Otherwise, in most of the cases, you have to depend on the season, availability as per the season. So that's why many of these materials are now being exchanged through tissue culture. Nonetheless, there are certain difficulties that are faced practically, and typically they involve delay at airports due to papers, custom clearance, documentation, import permits, phytosanitary certificates. If any of the documents are lacking, there will be a delay in release of the consignment, and that is very fatal for the tissue culture material. Sometimes temperatures rise on the airport in the custom, and if it crosses beyond 40-45 degrees Celsius, the agar tends to melt. Who knows the melting point of agar? Anybody familiar with the melting point of agar and the boiling point of agar? So the boiling point is around 60 degrees Celsius, but melting point is lower.
40.
Yeah. So when the ambient temperature crosses that, it tends to naturally melt, and that causes a problem in the cultures. And that can lead to either loss of cultures or infection, none of which is desirable. So practically over the years at NBPGR, we have been exchanging a lot of material through tissue culture in most of the vegetatively propagated crops, through especially with international laboratories. This is just an illustrative example of a recent exchange we did of banana from Belgium. We have brought it to India and even shared it with a farmer who is now cultivating it in the field. So use of tissue culture on ground is very much a reality these days. And another example, we have a large collection of taro in our in vitro gene bank, and it was being conserved for the last 20 years or so. Very recently, last year in fact, we have taken out the cultures, put them in the field and given it to our regional station in Thrissur, who have shared it with farmers in the field. So many direct applications of what this activity that we are doing is happening on a routine basis. Coming to the use of tissue culture for germplasm collecting. You have already heard what is germplasm collection and its logistics, right? Now, in very few cases, we are using tissue culture for aiding collecting, okay? So, just to define, this is the technique of directly placing materials into sterile tubes primarily for transport purposes. So here the application of tissue culture is to just bring the material from the field to the lab. And how it is done is in the field itself, basic sterilization procedures are carried out without the laminar airflow, just by using some standard sterilants. And again, it is done in cases of bulky or perishable material, recalcitrant seeds, and for quick transport in cases where material gets deteriorated, and to reduce the cost of transport. Typical examples where in vitro collecting has been done is in coconut, banana, rubber, cocoa, and many rare and wild species. So it's only a supporting activity, and the major challenge is contamination, because once we put it in artificial medium and it is not properly sterilized, bacteria or fungi tend to grow in that. It needs to be tailored specifically for each species, and also requires a little bit of skill. Just an illustrative example, what are the factors? So in vitro collecting requires a good experience in plant tissue culture. Which explant to select for which species needs to be known in advance. What is the optimal size of the explant so that there is enough tissue till it reaches the lab, and not small enough that it gets damaged or infected. What are the types of surface sterilization chemicals we use, whether they are toxic or they need a trade-off between toxicity and also taking care of the explants. Then there is damage of the tissue while trimming. What kind of vessel we carry is also important. Glass test tubes are not prescribed, mostly plastic test tubes, which we sometimes use in tissue culture. And also the optimal incubation conditions. Very extreme temperatures will be very harmful. So just an illustrative example of how in vitro collecting is done. Practically it is done, for instance, in coconut. Coconuts, as you know, are large nuts. So if we are to harvest the nuts and bring it to the lab, it becomes very, very bulky. So all of you have eaten coconut. Everybody is familiar with the plug. What is the plug in the coconut? There are 3 eyes. Yes? What do they represent? These 3 eyes. They represent the point of attachment of the stigma. Okay? And one of them will have the embryo in that. One embryo develops in every coconut. Has anybody tried to germinate a coconut? No. Next time you open a coconut, please try to look for the eye. Okay? It is located just below one of the 3 eyes. If you will open it, you will see a plug-like structure here. Okay? So this is the growing point in the coconut. This is what is used for in vitro collecting. So this is removed using a cork borer, or you can use a knife itself. And in the field you can use things like, bleaching agent. Everybody familiar with bleaching agents? No, nobody is doing washing of white clothes here. So that's a natural chlorine compound, or you can take alcohol or simple sterilants, and use that for sterilization in the field itself. Then they are transferred into a syringe body. Sorry. They can be sterilized within a syringe using a simple hypochlorite solution and transported in cryovials because the plug is very small. And once they are brought to the lab, they are re-sterilized again, cultured on a defined nutrient medium, and they grow into whole plantlets. So you reduce the bulk of carrying the germplasm to a great extent, and the only requirement over here is to have this viable protocol of multiplication. Okay, so this is routinely done in case of coconut. You can also harden the plants, and these are some of the other examples where in vitro collection has been reported practically on the field. Like I said, skill is required, and a little bit of planning is required when you are going to use this technique for collecting purposes. Again, the same practical problems of agar melting and desiccation needs to be taken care when we are doing in vitro collecting. Coming to disease eradication, how tissue culture is being used, and that is typically in the meristem cultures. So the advantage with meristems is they are smaller in size, they have smaller vacuoles and higher nucleocytoplasmic ratio, and most importantly they are more likely to withstand dehydration. Now meristem culture was traditionally used for virus eradication, but the only problem with meristem culture is the meristem itself is very small and very difficult to isolate, and then even more difficult to regrow into a whole plant, because normally the tissue gets injured while we are doing meristem isolation, and I think you will do meristem isolation in the afternoon. Okay, so if people are skilled enough to do meristem isolation, there is a probability of getting virus free plants, but now we are using the cryopreservation method to get virus free plants, and that has been termed as cryotherapy. Okay, so what we do is we typically take shoot tips which are larger in size as compared to meristem, subject them to cryopreservation by any of the methods that have been already told to you, and then after cryopreservation the virus load has been measured. Now how it works is this: since there are physiological differences in the physiological status of the differently located cells, only the meristematic cells which are small survive cryopreservation because they have less water because of the smaller vacuole content. The rest of the surrounding cells, subtending cells, tend to die, and it's only the very core meristematic cells which survive and regrowth. So that is taken as a microsurgery of the plant for getting whole plants. So by default, most of our cryopreservation regenerated plants will tend to be virus free, and people have now standardized protocols to obtain the highest amount of virus free material using cryotherapy, and these are standard typical cryopreservation protocols that we follow, which you will be also hopefully witnessing in the afternoon. And this just gives a schema of how these cells are surviving. So these are the very meristematic cells that are highly nucleic, and the surrounding cells having higher water content that get killed during cryotherapy. So practically it has been found that cryotherapy works to a larger extent than meristem culture for virus indexing, and this is now being routinely used for making virus free plants. Not only making virus free plants, but also viroids and phytoplasma like organisms. So bacteria, phytoplasma, viruses, most of them get eliminated if a suitable cryopreservation protocol is used for the crop in question. So that is all that I wanted to cover, and I have taken care of the time, hopefully. I would like to acknowledge the organizers for giving me this opportunity, Director NBPGR. All the work that I have shown has been done under many collaborative programs and through donors of germplasm. And of course, my staff of TCCU, Dr. Ira is very much here, and all of them have contributed in today's presentation. Thank you very much. I welcome all any questions or discussion.
Apart from soma colonization, did you got any epigenetic changes that occur in tissue culture generated plants?